Hi, are you struggling with Leetcode number 6? Well, I'm here to help. I too have struggled with Leetcode number 6, and it's caused me a lot of pain. Anyway, let's get started with breaking this down in an easy way for you to comprehend. First of all, they f*** you right off the bat by naming it ZigZag Conversion, because there's really no zigzag required for this. You need to think of this as going up and down, and suddenly everything becomes clear. Step 1 in landing a job at Amazon is understanding that they're trying to f*** you. They want you to screw up so they could filter out the people with lower IQ. The string PayPal is hiring is written in a zigzag pattern on a given number of rows like this. You may want to display this pattern in a fixed font for better... Okay, so as you can see, you could read it diagonally if you want, but you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is go down, go up, down, up. Very simple, right? So now we need a way to do this in code, of course. And there's two things you're going to need for this process. Or three things. The first thing you're going to need to know what direction you're going. So that'll be a Boolean variable, which we're going to change from true and false. The second thing you're going to need is a count variable. We want to count to a certain number because there's a finite number of rows. Obviously, there's going to come a time when you're going to need to change directions, right? In the same way, when you fail more than a certain amount of Amazon interviews, you're probably going to want to change career choice. And the last thing we're going to need is an array. Now, what's interesting about this array is the amount of sets of characters is determined by the amount of rows. And it's because of this, you're able to insert certain characters into certain sets, and then you could join all of them together and read it like one perfect string. So let's code this out together. Let's first take care of these things before we get into any of the actual good stuff. So the first thing we're going to want to check for is if the number of rows is equal to 1. Because if it's equal to 1, then you don't need to do all this bull. You can forget about this whole video. You just read the string as is, and then you return the string. Okay. Now, on the other hand, if the length of the string is less than the number of rows, then obviously you would just return the string too, and in that case there might not be a string to return. Okay, so if either of these are the case, very simple, you just return s. Alright, now let's get into it. So remember the three things that I told you needed? One of them was that Boolean variable, which is the direction. Now we're going to start off by setting it to false. And I'll explain why it has to be set to false initially later, okay? Just trust me on this now. You need it to be set to false. The other thing we need is the count. Now we're going to start by setting the count at 0. Go figure. And lastly, we need that array. Now remember what I told you. The array that you create, the amount of sets, has to be determined by the number of rows. Okay, this is very simple. And you want to we're going to begin populating these with the characters from the string. So for now, we could do fill nothing. Okay, so now let's get into the fun stuff. Now we create a for loop. Nothing super interesting here. So hope I don't make a spelling mistake and Okay, so now I'm going to write this for loop for the very first time. Definitely not my 6th attempt. Okay, so now the first thing we're going to do is make it more legible, because we're going to need to add whatever the ith value of the string is into our array at a certain spot. So first, because we're going to need to write s in the brackets I, it looks kind of ugly. Let's make it a little cleaner, and we'll call it current. Okay, so current will be whatever the ith value of the string is. So as we're going through the entire thing, each time you go through the for loop, you're going to have your current character, your current value. So now what do we do with it? Very easy. You have to add it into the array. But which set? You determine which set it gets added into by the count. That's why the count is important, and I'll explain more about that count shortly. So, for the array at whatever value it is, so within XYZ set, so let's say the first set, that would be if the count is 0, then all we want to do is add that current value. Okay? Seems easy enough, right? Now, you need to check for a few things. So, what you need to check for, first thing you would check for is if the count equals 0. Okay? If the count equals 0, you're going to change directions. So, for example, from going up, you would go down instead. Okay? Or, on the other hand, the opposite, you had reached the maximum amount of rows. So, if the count is greater than the number of rows, you'd have to write -1 because it's that you don't want to exceed that number of rows. So if it's greater than or equal to the number of rows -1, in that case, we are going to change direction. And the easiest way to do that is just to write out direction equals not direction, the opposite of the direction. So if it's true, then it would change to false. If it's false, then it's going to change to true. You get the picture. Now that's not the only thing we need to check for. Now, you see, you're checking if the count is 0. You're checking if the count is greater than the number of rows, greater than or equal to number of rows -1. So how do you change the count? Well, this is very easy too. First, you check if the direction is true. So, if the direction is true, then you're going to be adding to the count. So, let's say you're at 0. If the direction is still true, then it's now going to change to 1. On the other hand, if the direction is not, if the direction is false, then to go down. So let's say it's at 2, then it's going to be 1. Following that, it's going to be 0. And what do you know? When it hits 0, you change the direction. That's right. So now you change the direction, comes back, and now you're going to be adding to it. So you're going to go from 0 to 1 to 2. Makes sense, right? And this is essentially going to allow you to loop through this entire mess of strings very easily, add them into their appropriate sets, and then at the very end, because you can't just return the array, you join all the sets together. And you should be able to return that without issue. So, assuming I didn't make any spelling mistakes, this should work. Okay, so let's see how it does. Okay, look, you see, I might have f***ed up a few times before I recorded this, but we'll keep that between you and me. And what's really fantastic about this solution is, since you're just using one for loop only, the time complexity is just O of n. Not to mention, since you're only using one array, the space complexity is also O of n. So your interviewer is absolutely going to love that. No brute force BS. You never want to do that in an interview. It's going to look bad because you normally don't have to, unless it's a last resort. Maybe if you're freaking out at the interview and you're shit your pants, then you want to give them a brute force method just so you could buy more time to think of the actual method. But other than that, I hope I have helped you resolve your PTSD from Leetcode problem 6. If not, I would recommend that you re-watch this video. It'll boost my watch time and maybe get me some subscribers.